casting live again Wednesday, 7 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube. And we are so happy that you could join us on this free African night to discuss African female storytellers and the stories that we love from them. As you know, is our custom, we start every book club with a quote that sums up the feeling about our guest. And tonight, our quote is from past President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and the quote goes like this. I believe that there are certain attributes in a woman that give her some advantages over a man. Women are usually more honest, more sensitive to issues, and bring a stronger sense of commitment and dedication to what they do. Maybe because they were mothers, and being a mother, you have that special attention for the family, for the young, for children. And I believe that this quote sums up the journey that this author has been on through her body of work, and for a lot of what she stands for in her contribution to knowledge. Today, we have Dr. Sindiwe Magona with us in the studio. Welcome, Dr. Sindiwe. How are you?
Thank you for having me, and I am very, very well, thanks.
Right. So, for those of you who may be new to Dr. Sindiwe Magona's work and who she is, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her before we get into the interview. She has done so much that I'm scared that we're not going to be able to cover her rich background in the 45 minutes we have, but we're going to do our best. Dr. Sindiwe Magona, a graduate of Columbia University, is an author, poet, playwright, storyteller, actor, and inspirational speaker. Magona retired from the United Nations, where she worked in the anti-apartheid radio programs till June 1994 and UN Film Archives till her retirement. After 25 years in New York, she relocated to her home country, South Africa. Magona is currently Senior Research Fellow at the University of the Western Cape, where she is also a PhD candidate, no longer candidate, holder in creative writing. Her works to date include To My Children's Children, Forced to Grow, an autobiography, Living, Loving, and Lying Awake at Night, and Push, Push, and Other Stories, an anthology of short stories, and novels Mother to Mother, Beauty's Gift, Life is a Hard but Beautiful Thing, Chasing the Tails of My Father's Cattle, and recently released in the last year and a half, When the Village Sleeps. She has a plethora of other academic and written works, including 120 children's books, including The Best Meal Ever, Skin We Are In, and Folk Tales. She is a master of almost every written form that you would want to master as a writer, and we are very, very happy to have her with us. Her awards include honorary doctorates from Hartwick College, USA, Rhodes University, Nelson Mandela University, and Fort Hare, the Order of Ikamanga Children's Poet Laureate. And she is a homophile, holds all life sacred, especially the environment, Mother Earth. So, Dr. Sindiwe, tell us the story behind this story of accolades. You started writing or publishing at the age of 47, which a lot of people don't know, because this would seem like you came out of the womb writing, but you started at 47, and your children at that stage were probably adults. Many of them probably degreed at that point. What on earth possessed you to begin that journey, especially with all of that portfolio at the United Nations, your extensive academic background, which I've heard you describe as crawling up a tree like a snail? Why?
Yes. You are looking at someone who is surprised her life is the life it is. But more than surprised, grateful. Pleasantly surprised, hugely, but pleasantly surprised and grateful. Grateful. Then I look at who I was, and I see a lot of me all around the world, especially in my country. And I know, I am not convinced, I know she looking so bereft, does not have to be there until she dies. This is the only gift I have to the poor, the oppressed, the disparaged, the hated, those who are unappreciated, not beautiful, not this, not that, not this. You are everything you were meant to be. Just wake up to yourself. Be active in your life. If I had listened to all the noise in my life, I wouldn't have made it to 30. And I would definitely not have done any of the things you just said. Right? Me, get matric, me, and a lot of other things. My journey is that of discovery, finding myself bit by little bit, but always onward. I stumbled on the potential in me, in my body, potential that every human being has. This is what aches me when I see people who have not woken, who have not been made aware, who have not been nurtured, because we are born with a lot of potential. But as kids, we need grown-ups to nurture us into getting alive into who we are. Babies could never be anything without grown-ups. Children need us, the village. Not only the birth parents, not only the immediate family, everybody. We need to be mindful of the young. The young are the future of humanity. And it's our duty, our obligation, our God-given duty to nurture the young. It's as simple as that. And the older I get, of course, the more younger people there are. So my mouth doesn't stop saying, listen, listen, listen. And because I can't, our form of storytelling, which is basic in African living and life, has changed because of the changed circumstances. I can no longer sit by the fireside and have grandchildren and other children of the village come and listen to my storytelling. This is the new way of storytelling, putting pen to paper.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So one of the motivations, especially behind the memoir to my children's children, was around the adjusting or adapting to publishing as a form of preserving that passing on of knowledge, passing on of identity, which is a recurring theme throughout all of your work, to the next generation. And you write in that book that you address your children's children in that book. And one of the things that you say is that you may not be there to tell them all of the things that you feel compelled to share in the book. And this is why you wrote to my children's children. But what I find interesting about the style in which it is written is that it's written in a very lyrical, verbal style. So we see the author as a poet in that style, but we see something very authentic to the oral African storytelling form. So tell us a little bit about how you managed to put that process into writing and how it was received in terms of publishing, because it was quite, and it is quite a disruptive way of writing, yet can still be literary. It's hard to pull it off in a way that it can still be literary. So how did that come to you to be able to make it literary and not just another grandmother telling her grandchildren things that they should know? How did you make bring the wonder to the common?
You're going to hear the word surprised a lot from me. I am a surprised author, but I knew even then in my late 40s, as I was writing my life story, part of the impetus to do that was that I could see the changes that were there already, the things I had taken for granted and even looked down upon them and despised them a little. and the things that had been an integral part of my life as a child were not there for my children. And I could see that by the time their children came along, they would not even be there in memory. And some of those things I began to understand were important in the me I was beginning to become, the new me, the me who was now at the United Nations. And so I realized that some of the things that were disappearing and some we had been happy to see disappear should not have been allowed to disappear. What would happen if I went away, went to the land of the no longer there, the fleshless ones, the dead, and these things disappeared even from memory? While I live, I can remind my children, and maybe they will listen. But after I'm dead, who is there to say it used to be like, we were not always this, we should, you know what I mean? I realized that I had received a lot from my grandmothers and my aunts and other storytellers. I wasn't doing that. I was not in the village. I was not even in a township or location in South Africa. I was in New York. I thought to myself, you better put it down. At first, really, I wasn't writing a book to be read by people. I wasn't writing a book. Who was I to think I could write a book? I didn't have that dream. But I had read some of those people who go to university for 4 and more years and learn to go and dig up bones and old, cups that were used by people centuries ago. You know those people? Yes. I thought, I knew one day apartheid would end, all systems end. I didn't think it would end during my lifetime. I'm not going to say that. I didn't. Nobody did. We were all surprised when apartheid died. But I thought, in 100 or 200 years, people will have forgotten what it was to be an ordinary child and human being, a black person in South Africa under apartheid. Let me tell them, let me tell the world, when I said the title, To My Children's Children, it was not to my biological offspring, to the future, to those people in South Africa, in the whole of in the world, who will want to go and dig up. One of them will find my manuscript and say, look what I found. Someone who's telling how it was to be black in apartheid South Africa. People now tell me my biographies, autobiographies, are very good material for history, for psychology, for social science, because of the honesty in them. Well, I was brutally honest. I didn't know you were going to read all that nonsense about me and look me in the face. I was writing for posterity. I am a much surprised author, I can tell you. But when I talked to people about what I had written, somebody here in South Africa said, that sounds like a book. I went, what? He said, I think you could publish that. What? Eventually, I got goaded and guided into even getting it to a publisher. Wasn't my doing. I was feeling too little. I didn't trust myself, didn't believe in myself. Someone had to go and find a publisher for me. I have had lots of help, but as I said in the beginning, I did the writing. I had the urge to share my life with posterity. When you do, help will find you.
Wow, that is incredible, and that's really powerful and inspiring, because it speaks so much about a flow. But what I love about your story, and I think this is part of your, really the center of your life message and Force to Grow, is how you champion every individual taking personal responsibility for their own growth, their own progress, and their own success. And you use yourself as an example to inspire that, rather than to say, this is what I've done. The message is, this is what you can do and it's up to you. And you are actually the one that you've been waiting for. When you wrote Forced to Grow, that was uh, more of a message to yourself, and a little bit more introspective in comparison um, to my children's children. What were you thinking of? Because some people would be like, well, you've already done the first memoir about the early years. What's the deal with this other one? And with this other autobiographical work. Why did you foray into that space and come to tell the story from this angle?
Well, I wasn't publishing. I told you, didn't I? That whole thing was written as one big blog of a book. From birth to going and being at the United Nations, leaving South Africa. That was my life. And this is what I wanted to share. The publisher then made the decision to split it into two. So now I had to learn to conclude the first part, find a meaningful part. So we felt there was enough of my life written until the leaving South Africa for the UN, and then start. So that's where I began to learn the skills of making it look natural when it wasn't that kind of thing. So the introduction to my children's children, the conclusion to my children's children, and the introduction to Forced to Grow, those were things that came, with I'm getting ready for publication. And as far as I was concerned, I had shared what I thought was my life, and that was it. I didn't set out to do a whole body of work. I was done. I had written, and I was surprised and happy. I had 2 books.
Okay, so you had 2 books, wonderful memoirs, powerful stories and messages to Africans, to multiple generations of Africans, to women, and also to a particular spectrum of women. All right. Mm-hmm. Then you veer into playwriting, and Mother to Mother is a book that had a different journey. And I think that is very interesting because you took a real life event, but you dealt with it and treated it with a very creative hand. It was able to then be translated to theater, and really actually took on a life of its own. What happened there? Because you were done, and then you sparked off into this other area, and even a different genre, a different format and style of writing. Were you intimidated in any way by crossing over from memoir to this type of writing? Because I feel like when you write a memoir about yourself, you have a sense of authority. No one can tell you that this is not your story. But when you write about a real life event, about the things that happened and shaped a psyche of a nation at a particular time, and then you write it so vividly, it becomes, something living, breathing on stage. What was that like for you?
Yes, Mother to Mother is my first novel, but it's my 5th book. After the 2 books that became, autobiographies, I was goaded into continuing to write, because after To My Children's Children, at a conference at the University of Cape Town, a writers' conference, a professor told me something I had known without owning it, knowing it fully, that black women, Bantu women in South African terminology of the day, since they started being published in the 30s or 40s, in 1990, when To My Children's Children got published, only 5 Bantu women had been published in this country. 5. Then this professor went on to say, but this is true of all Africa. African women writers will come with one or two very good books, autobiographies or autobiographical novels, and then they disappear. You know what? I made up my mind right there and then, because that I wouldn't disappear. I was going to go on writing, because I realized why I had started writing so late in my life. Lack of role models. We don't write because we see no one who looks like us write. I thought to myself, I'm not writing to outdo whoever in England was female and wrote good books. I am writing for children in South Africa, in Africa, and throughout the diaspora who look like me, and especially those who happen to be female. Women, the girl child must grow up seeing someone who looks like their mother, their grandmother, their auntie, writing books. That's how, when the Amy Bill said story, that tragedy happened, of course, the whole world heard about it the same day. It made headline news throughout the world. Gugulethu is what I called home when I was in South Africa then. The place where the event took place, when I worked as a welfare worker, that was my area. I could take you there blindfolded. I was so saddened that somebody's child a young woman had died like that. And the more I read about it, the sadder I got. But like most people, I wasn't going to do anything about it. I never did before. I read or hear of tragedies of that nature, empathize deeply with what I used to think of as the family of, the bereaved family. And that to me was, those whose child or loved one had died, had been, murdered. Nothing was different. I wasn't going to seek out the bills. I wasn't going to do anything. 4 months later, in April, I came back. South Africa had its first truly democratic elections. I was here for 6 weeks. I did nothing about the story. It was news, of course, so was the election. So, the episode of us voting for the first time. 6 weeks later, the last day in the evening, my best friend, Lindiwe Magona, takes me to the airport. Those days you could drive to the airport, park there, get in with the passenger, have lunch or dinner. We'd had our dinner, we were, chatting about, we are in line for me to, to board. We talk about the election. Then we talk about the Amy Bill killing. Those 4 young men were on trial who were accused of the murder. And Lindy says to me, "Yo, do you know that one of those 4 boys is so-and-so's child?" What? This person she names is somebody with whom I had played as a child. We were all neighbors, Lindiwe and this, child who became the mother of one of the 4. I said, oh my God. And then I surprised myself with the next words out of my mouth. How is she coping? That day, my life changed. I had never before empathized with the family of a perpetrator. But because this was someone I used to know, someone about whom I can say in the tradition of poor people the world over, whose saliva I know. Poor children playing, you have a piece of candy or gum in your mouth, guess what? More people. I knew her that much. And also, I got to remember, lest I forget, just how singularly lucky I have been, how blessed I have been by the universe, by God, by my ancestors. There is no reason, nowhere is it written, that should have been her child and not mine. When we were growing up, our families were the same. My family wasn't as if you, oh yeah. I have parents, neither of whom passed standard 6. Between the two of them, there wasn't one certificate of education. Here I am. In October, November, I'm going to graduate with a PhD. Who am I? Why have so much good been poured on me? Then I remembered our tradition. I didn't say I was writing a book, but from that moment, this woman's fate never left my heart. 4 long months, I thought about her and how she was coping. I had never thought of the family of a murderer, a perpetrator in this sin, as having anything with which to cope. My mind, my spirit, my heart changed from that day. Both families suffer, yes, from different angles, but admitting the suffering of one does not deny and shouldn't deny the suffering of the other. Nobody would want to be the mother of a killer. I know I wouldn't. And then 2 years later, I was still filled with this feeling. And I was incensed at the response of my nation from de Klerk onwards. A day to march through Gugulethu to make the streets of Gugulethu safe. Gugulethu was not safe long before Amy died on her streets. And walking through Gugulethu for one day wasn't going to change that. I knew that much. But politicians the world over have this way of dealing with reality that they show the people who vote for them, tell them, show them something that is not there. You know, the distance between myth and reality is how we live. The myth was making Gugulethu safe. The reality I knew was that was nonsense. And the fact that those 4 young men were found guilty, they were, don't get me wrong. But I also felt all of us South Africans, black and white, all the grown-ups were responsible for allowing race hate in our country to reach those levels. Race hate is an integral part of the life of South Africans to this day. Then I remembered our tradition, Ubuntu. When my child does something wrong to that family, it is me who must pick up myself and go there to apologize. Doesn't bring the dead person back, but it paves the way towards reconciliation. There will never be reconciliation as long as there is no admission of guilt and then attempting to make whatever amends the other party says, well, negotiation, so that people can go back to being as they were before. You know, that when we meet on the way to get water or to fetch, wood from the forest, it's not going to be a fight. Coexistence is rooted on the sense that when this is ruptured, you must, as quickly as possible, mend the fences. But I also knew that this woman had left school very early for her to be able, well, I was wrong, to be able, later I discovered, to have enough English, I thought, to approach the bills. But then the bills wouldn't have any business knowing any isiXhosa. So the beginnings of the book began to be my need to talk to the bills, my need to say, yes, those 4 young men were responsible, but we were all, and we should all apologize. Your child died because of our race hate in South Africa. So, that kind of thing. But then I am a little bit of a scaredy cat. I'm not bold. I wasn't going to go find the bills at all. Instead, I wrote the book.
Yes. Yes.
That's my
Yes.
way of doing things. I write instead of, honestly.
Mm. But as we are hearing from one of our viewers, very insightful and very important to say, because much like all of your body of work, it was a collective conversation. It was deeply painful and individual to one family, but actually it was a microcosm of a huge and a bigger issue. And it
Exactly,
needed to
yes.
be addressed because,
Mm.
every child is precious to someone, and every person that is killed is somebody's child. And we need to honor that and to appreciate that. And I find the approach using the frame of a mother speaking to another mother brings that out on a level that I don't think other frames would be able to do, because there is nowhere where we see children and family more clearly than through a mother's voice,
Yes.
and through a mother's experience. I think that that was really, really powerful. Um, uh, going, I like to touch on When the Village Sleeps, but before there, looking at your vast body of work in children's stories, and writing for children, which I personally have always believed is a little bit more challenging than writing to adults. I think there's a little bit more work in writing everyday concepts, also writing about culture and identity and certain values and principles in a way that makes them tangible for children. Because I do think children need to understand things from a very tangible perspective. But I also believe that writing for children is often the test of a true communicator. If you can explain something to a child, if you can connect with a child and convey a message that is felt and exchanged in a very meaningful way, then as a communicator, you have learned the art of clarity, being concise, and conveying meaning at the heart of it. So you've done hundreds of books. You've also forayed a lot into vernacular languages and using those to convey the stories and the meanings. What has that been like for you, and what role do you think that that has to play in the ongoing education of children in South Africa but also across the region?
Writing for children looks deceptively easy because these are such little books, 8 pages, 30 pages, 50 pages. But there lies the rub. How do you make a complete story in 8 pages and make it meaningful? You said the content has to be something variable in the journey of the child becoming. How do you do that without sounding preachy? Writing for children is something I love, but I wish I were much better at it than I am. For me, writing for children, I have to imagine I am there with the child. When you are with them, it's easier because then as you say things, they can see your demeanor. The way you pose, the eye to eye contact is much easier. Doing it on the page doesn't quite get there for me. Most of the stories I have done, I have had help because I have cheated, if you call it that, by having something lekker, as we say, something delicious or something amusing, and then telling stories, engaging and asking and begging and learning. You learn a lot from children because they are so honest. If your story is boring, their bodies tell you. When the child starts to sit like this, and even a little one starts sucking their thumb and humming their other songs, you've lost me. Where a grown up would be, because they have learned to be mannerly, sit there and pretend to be amused by your story. The child doesn't do that. They are bored. They show you boring. So, but I believe we can help all grown-ups, mothers, sisters, bigger, siblings. We should be reading to the child every day. I wish I were the president of something or the president of a country. There would be an hour of, during the war when for an hour nothing moves, there will be an hour of grown up to child, read. And then, for me, if I were in the child grant system, part of it would be how the child is reading, vocabulary, the way, to be part, because it's not just the belly that must be fed, dear God. The spirit of the child, the brain of the child, the zest for living in the child should be, measured, witnessed, and celebrated. We don't celebrate our children enough. We don't celebrate them at all, which is why they go and celebrate themselves, and sometimes with disastrous results. We don't celebrate our young. And we had festivities, occasions in our cultures that we have abandoned because we are civilized.
I think that is powerful, and I love your passion for awakening children's spirits, because it mirrors so much of what you said earlier about waking up to ourselves. And I think that definitely happens by teaching ourselves to think for ourselves, and to explore the themes of life for ourselves, no matter how many people have already explored them before us, but having that conversation for ourselves. And so for me, that is inextricably tied to reading, because there's something about reading that teaches you to think through a process of thought, to think out a idea, to imagine, to see what cannot be seen literally, and to understand, and through understanding, accept or have the courage to imagine changing what is so widely accepted. And so for me, reading is one of the most powerful ways to awaken that in a person's spirit. And I, like you, believe that the sooner we can get people to do that, reading at an early age and learning to read for pleasure, not
Yes.
for education, not transactionally, that is the journey that then begins. And once you give a child that joy of reading, you've set them up for life, because you've given them a key to unlock so many journeys,
Yes.
so many ideas, and so many different experiences. But you mentioned earlier, when you were talking about children's books, about the disappearing of things we would do to celebrate children, and how children then, in the need to fill that void, go and find ways to fill that void, or to celebrate, sometimes with disastrous consequences. And this is obviously a theme we've seen in Mother to Mother, but it brings me to your most recent piece of work, which is When the Village Sleeps. And you've got 4 generations of women, we're seeing mothers and daughters, grandmothers and granddaughters, and a grandmother and a great granddaughter. And in all of that convergence of those relations, of what you've talked about in terms of children making some very difficult decisions or weird decisions, which could have been captured or redirected had there been an adult watching, or an adult available or present, which I think parlays into the title When the Village Sleeps, because we all know that saying it takes a village to raise a child. Why, after 120 books of short stories, academic writing, do you come back to novel writing with this particular book at this particular time, written and published during COVID pandemic, in the midst of multiple lockdowns, and sort of like a fusion of almost all of your work to date, because we've got the legacy of apartheid in there, but we've got some very modern, present issues also reflected in that book.
Yeah. When the village sleeps, awoke in, most of the books, especially the novels and short stories, and the essays. I have a book of essays coming out next year, I think, are provoked out of me by circumstances I witnessed. A long time ago, I had read in a community magazine of a very, very sad, disgusting first, but, in retrospect, very sad story of the maiming in the womb of babies, deliberate maiming in the womb of babies. I hadn't done anything about it, but that story never left me. That a young woman, first of all, would, from the age of 13, decide to have a baby, get the baby by 16, but during the pregnancy, decide to maim the child in her womb. That for me was, I grew up. I knew before I left the country in my late 30s, I knew of, children whose mothers drank during pregnancy and how they were funny when they were born and how that affected their health. I knew that. There's lots of that in South Africa. But to deliberately do it, to come to a decision, this is what is best for me, to maim the infant in my womb, this was mind-boggling. Did I do anything? No. At the beginning of the pandemic, when I saw poverty lined up for food, at the beginning, when people didn't know where to get food for their 2, 3, 6 children, came knocking at every door, the panic. And a lot of those children looked like they had been maimed in the womb. I'm not saying deliberate, but you can't have the first child like that and, accidentally, and then the second and the third. To have 4 children come out of your womb and you never stop what you did with the... Then I thought to myself, ngesiXhosa we say, inkai ingena ngentlonto. The beginning of balding starts with the inching in of the hairline. A man doesn't wake up the next morning with half the hair gone. No, this line goes in, imperceptibly almost, but eventually that is how bad things happen. They start little by little by little. When I was here, before I left South Africa, this was something that happened in the farmlands, where people got part of their salary was the DOP liquor. Yeah? Now it's happening everywhere. This is happening to everybody. It's in the townships, it's in families with professional people. And the decision to do it consciously, to take that decision, so it has grown. But where will it end? Will it end with South Africa, with a population where the majority of people have been maimed like that? This is what I explore. It's a wake-up call to the sleeping village that we are as a nation. Wake up, South Africa. This is our responsibility collectively. We have to stop this nonsense. We have to find a way. But you can never stop an evil you haven't opened your eyes to. And right now, we are asleep.
That is so powerful. You can never stop an evil you haven't opened your eyes to. And
No.
it is important, yeah. And I
The
think
first
this is
step
the
is to see,
yes.
acknowledge, accept then perhaps you will go towards, you know,
Mhm.
what must I do? What should I
Yeah.
do? And doing that.
Mm.
You can't act on something you either turn a blind eye to or don't see totally. We've turned a very big blind eye to the evil in our midst.
That's so true. And evil flourishes when good men do nothing. It's
Yes.
very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. The theme of waking up, not only waking up to ourselves, but waking up to the evil that is eating up our society,
Yes.
our communities, and the
We
next
are the
generation.
village. We are
Mm,
the village. That's
very, very
my
powerful.
response. I'm not saying it's an adequate one, but I'm saying we have to start somewhere. Mine
Mhm.
is to say, let me, can, if I had the power, I'd go to parliament and preach there. I don't have that power.
Mm,
You do what you can with who you are. I'm an old
mm.
woman. All I have are words, so I write.
Mm. Well, definitely more than just an old woman. And as you are in your 70s, entering into your 70s, there is definitely
Entering
um,
next year, I'll be 80. I'm leaving my 70s.
entering your 70s. Well, it's not fair to share the exact age of a lady, but yes, definitely in your 70s, your youthful spirit, but definitely the wisdom of an elder is there and needed. And that's powerful. And I think that many of the things that you've chosen to explore and accomplish are kind of like little passports and visas that give you entry to speak to a nation, speak to a generation in a way that possibly other women in their 70s might not have. Although, in our cultures, a certain age does give you a level of influence and authority. So that is really, really powerful. But we are sort of coming to the end of our short amount of time. And I feel like we've only just sort of gone through the introduction of an amazing book. So we will definitely be looking into some of the books we've talked about, I think, in greater detail. But as is our custom on the book club, we always like to close out each show with a reading from the author.
Oh,
So
Lord.
we've asked Dr. Magona to read from her latest offering, When the Village Sleeps, to close out today's show. So she's going to read a little bit for us, and please enjoy it and receive it with the heart that it is meant, and see in which way you can wake up in your part of the village, so that we can come out of the slumber and the darkness that threatens to eat up our children. Dr. Magona, take it away.
When the village sleeps, this is page 214. Let me show you something. And Kulu upped and went to fetch her bag, calling Busi to her room to come and join them. Returning, she took out a bank statement and gave it to Phyllis. Remember what we spoke about the other day when I praised Busi's very apparent money management skills, and she was interrupted because as she spoke, she planked down the bank statement she had refrained from showing to them during that discussion. Now, at the sight of it, Phyllis screamed, "Ma, where did you get all this money?" Curious, Lily grabbed the document and perused it, her eyes growing larger and larger. Then she looked rather than spoke her question. Finally, Busi picked up the paper and scrutinized it. "That's not my money. Look carefully." Three pairs of eyes looked. "Yeka mandlakazi, mandlakazis." All three shouted at once. Kulu nodded. "But, Busi," Kulu said, "do you remember when I asked you for the baby's Sasa card? What did you think I wanted that card for? To get the money." Kulu shook her head. "No," she said. "First of all, it is not her money. Children have no need for money. Their parents do." "Well, to help the parents then," Lily said. Kulu nodded. "Help the parents." She looked at the three women before her daughters and the daughter of the elder one. "But," she said, I didn't need any help. Not that kind of help, monetary help anyway. Phyllis was quick with her question. What did you feed her then? You mean you don't know? After all this time, milk from my animals, sheep, goat, or cow. As for food, that is why we have gardens. You grew all her food? Lily asked. That is all Mandlakazi has been raised on. Food fresh from the garden and the field. And you're telling us all this money? Phyllis nodded her head towards the sheet of paper on the table before. Is from Sasa? Incredulity rode on each word out of her mouth. Lily managed to squeeze out a single word from the throat blocked by sheer disbelief. Sasa! Makulu nodded.
Thank you, Dr. Magona. It has been a pleasure to sit at your feet on this winter night. You have warmed up our souls and our spirits. Thank you for all that you have done and for all that you continue to do. We look forward to the release of your book of essays, and we hope to review it here on the book club. To the rest of
Thank
our
you,
viewers,
Serena. And Amanda.
yes, and to the rest of our viewers, stay warm, stay safe, and we'll see you next week, same time, with another African female storyteller. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.